And now, Dan, I've got to
Morning.
share screens with you.
Yep.
You
So,
want me to do an intro first?
I think you can do the intro first. Yes, that'll be
Okay.
great.
All
Thank
right.
you, Martha.
All right. Dan Robards lives in Brunswick, Maine, but hails from northern New Hampshire, where he began his horticultural training as a home gardener. He has worked in many nurseries in the Northeast and holds a PhD in plant breeding and population genetics from Ohio State University. Dan uses his expertise at Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens to manage greenhouse efforts in propagation, growing and plant development, teaches numerous adult level classes, and acts as the caretaker for the Giles Rhododendron Garden. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Dan.
Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now I've got to share a screen with you.
Sure. Let's see what we can do.
Okay.
I'll try mine. Not yet.
Okay.
Ooh. Now I've got your screen.
You've got my screen? Okay. We want to get off of here.
Yep.
Okay. We did this before, folks, so you're with us.
It was beautiful. With some kind of enable guest screen share. I'm not sure where that one is.
Okay. Okay. One participant. Okay. Advance. Multiple participants can share. Dual monitors recommended. Only host. All righty. Well, this is interesting. Okay, everybody, bear with us.
Refill your coffees quickly. I've got a lot of slides to share with you. So now's the time.
Okay. Share computer share. That didn't do it again.
Yep.
All right. All right. So Dan, how did we do this before?
There's some, as you're the host, I think you have the ultimate permission giving.
Yeah.
There's somewhere in the share screen that you can allow participants to share screen.
Okay.
And it may allow you to select individual people.
Okay.
But it only took about 3.5 minutes last time, so we did pretty well.
I know. Multiple.
Okay, share. Oh, hold on. There we
Is that
go.
it?
Wait, no, I think that might be it. Let me try
Okay.
this. Now I have a different window that I'm allowed to do. I think you've given me permission. I am screen sharing.
You've got it. You've got it.
Oh, well, thank you. I've got to move some things around so I can move our little faces to the side.
Mm-hmm.
And when I bring this up in the full screen, my face, I can't see my own face just because I can't see my shared screen, which will be just the presentation.
Okay.
So if I lose part of my head and then Martha can just yell at me and say, stand up, sit up straight, Dan, sit in your chair like a big boy.
Okay.
And I'll do my best to do that. So I'll start that now. Is that looking like it's full screen?
Yes, it is to me. How is it to Martha? Does it look like we've got a full screen to you?
Martha's now muted, so I don't know where Martha is. I don't know if Martha's muted because I'm talking or.
Okay.
The screen looks good.
Okay.
The
Thank you.
screen's fine.
All right. Very good. All
Okay,
right.
shall we?
We can start
dive in?
anytime you want, Dan.
Okay, well, first, thank you very much to all of you at the Portsmouth Garden Club for having me today. It is always a pleasure to give a presentation and speak to other enthusiastic horticulturists about plants and places and all of the things in gardens that we all love so much. So with that, I'm going to get started. I've got a lot of slides to go through. As this is being recorded, you can come back and check them later. But to give you a big sense of a little bit of everything, I guess. I have many, many slides, so it may feel like I'm cruising through them quickly, but I can always revisit them for question and answer at the end. If you have take some notes saying slide about this, or ask about that, because the questions we're saving those for the end. So please make a note and we can revisit any pictures or slides that we need. And with that, the presentation I put together for you today is about the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens, horticultural developments, kind of the behind the scenes nuts and bolts, and the aspirations of how we've come to be who we are and where we are going from here. From the perspective, primarily as a horticultural department, as we are just a piece of the greater botanical gardens, as there's a lot of administrative and other kind of caretaking departments that work to keep us going every day. So with that, let's get going. Here I am, me. I am Dan Robarts. I am from way up where 93 goes to die, in the far northern part of the state in a town called Lancaster. I went to Bates College in Maine, then Boston University for my master's, and decided that I had to break out a little bit and move out of my beloved New England, but still be close by, and worked on a PhD at The Ohio State University. As Nancy mentioned, I started at a very early age. This is my first seed-grown plant. This is a dianthus I grew from seed, and this is me at the age of 6. Very proud of my efforts. And it kind of my teaching, I guess, or my own teaching, I thought ended with a PhD at Ohio State University, where I paired with the USDA to work on genetics of pansies and violets, looking at flower shape and size and how that, and color, and how that relates to their underlying genetic code. But as I move from throughout New England, we all know that we see new plants and we love them. We can't help but pick up a pot of something here and there. So I started accumulating plants. And this is my time in Boston vicinity. This is my very small backyard. There's enough parking spaces for 3 cars. Almost all the backyard was paved. But what was grass became the holding pen for all of my plants. Primarily, I've been a daylily breeder and collector, but also a love of woodland plants and pretty much anything that is just something new, different, or a good garden plant. And that's my trusty car in the back, which has been all over everywhere with me, collecting plants, speaking, whatever, and it's still outside at 15 years old and 275,000 miles later. And just moving around from house to house. I mean, this is another picture of what 500 pots of mostly daylilies. You can't see the, here's my mouse, back here by the steps in the door, all the shade perennials around the back. I mean, moving 1,000 pots of 2 or 3 gallon, 5 gallon size gets old when you go from house to house and state to state. I've really thought after my PhD, I need to find a job. I need a place to settle. But with the training that I had, I could kind of look toward academia and be a professor or be teaching, or maybe work for the government or some beloved company like Monsanto. But I didn't know quite where I was going to end up. But I always knew that no matter where I ended up, I'd have to rent a separate car. Or separate vehicles, then I was going to take every single one with me. So when looking for jobs, I found a position open for a horticulturist and grower at the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens in Boothbay, Maine. Maybe some of you have been here or are members, and thank you very much. And if not, then I would love to see you here sometime. It's a lovely place to be. It is the core gardens are about 15 acres on the southern end of the Boothbay Peninsula. Excuse me, it's the only botanical garden actually in North America and maybe the world that is, you can arrive by boat, not only large boat, but by kayak if you want. You could come up the river here. It's the tip of a peninsula where the back river to the right is coming down and actually flowing south, which is kind of down in this picture. But it's a lovely space to visit, and here are those 15 acres of core gardens as they have primarily been, with a few additions, for the last 10 years or so, excluding the recent expansion work that we've been doing, and we'll talk about that later. So in thinking about jobs and being in Ohio, which was a great time and place, I really wanted to come back to more of a rural New England space. The booming metropolis I grew up in had a population of about 3,000. We did host the county fair, but they're really, the small town feeling was really something that I liked, even though everything closes at 8 or 9 o'clock. I mean, it it was really where I wanted to be and wanted to raise my family after being in Boston and Columbus, which is not as busy as Boston to be sure, but wanting to have a space where there's enough room to romp around for kids and family and still enjoy the out of doors in a kind of rough and rustic way. And also coming back to New England, I have a lot of sweet teeth. Most of them are fillings now, but eggnog, you can't get this stuff when you leave. I mean, look at this spread. I mean, I take pictures. This is actually something I sent to friends while I was in grad school. I'd come home for Christmas and said, hey guys, look what I can get when I go home. Can't get this in Ohio, can you? And you all know Hood's Golden is the classic eggnog off the shelf. It's quite splendid. So another reason I had to come back. And again, as I mentioned, I have twins who are now 6 and are just in their first week of first grade, however that's going to play out. And I've really felt that I didn't want to raise them in Boston-ish where they were born. I really wanted them to be outside and have a kind of a small town feel where they can be connected to nature and where food comes from and where everything kind of comes from, as I had grown up experiencing. So we found a house, which is my lovely Dutch barn from the 70s. And we started, this is some of the walls that I did constructing, but we found a house basically, we settled down, and then we started into work. What brought me here again was the job at the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens, where I'm not wearing it now. We'll see pictures of my various hats through the presentation, but there are a lot of hats that everyone on the horticulture team wears. Primarily, I'm a horticulturist. I manage the rhododendron garden, and I also manage the growing and propagation. But the sub-levels within that, I also ended up being kind of a bonus for my hire, which actually was one of the reasons I was brought on, is that I could bring my research and academic experience to the gardens and spearhead kind of a botanical and horticultural research initiative to work on primary research, to partner with universities and such and do botanical research, but also work on plant breeding and new plant development, which was the sister half of my research from Ohio State I didn't really mention, but that's really a love of mine. Breeding plants and creating new plants, just the idea of making something new. These are my paints, I don't draw, I don't paint, I don't sculpt, but making new flowers of different colors, shapes, or foliage textures, that's really where I find a lot of meaning. And that opportunity has been afforded me here, so that's great. And again, I manage all the greenhouses we have here, which we'll talk about in a minute, all 2 and now 3. And again, why could I come back? I need eggnog. That stuff is delicious. I don't know how human being could not live in New England for a big thing of Hood's Golden. That stuff is splendid. So anyway, the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens, where I work and this presentation is about, its goal is to inspire connections between people, plants, and nature through horticulture, education, and research. So I fit all 3 of those bullets: horticulture, education, and research, and some of my time is spent doing all 3 of those. As Martha mentioned, I do teach a lot of classes here. A lot of them are kind of the dry, dust off the old textbook, sit and listen to me talk for 8 hours, the old professor that I am now that I just turned 40 last week. But we have a little bit of that and also some outdoor plant ID classes, some ornamental plant development classes, all sorts of things. But here in Maine, the Botanical Gardens, for those of you who haven't visited and those who have, we're going to go through a little background of the spaces. When I thought of Maine coming here, I mean, I drove from, where were we? We were in Boston-ish at the time, and I drove up, not having been in Maine for a long time. I vacationed here as a child, but what did Maine mean to me? It was rocks, water, and summer fun, and that's really kind of what the gardens is inspired with also. They've spent a lot of time, this is now slides of the gardens, developing hardscape that really reflects Maine in a kind of dear and loving way, I feel, with a whole lot of hardscape, but there's a lot of stone. We have more stone and stone walls, which we've made and incorporated from our landscape. In our gardens, so things you need to track. So here are a couple of slides of all the stonework that has been done for large-scale stone for developing our garden spaces here in Duke Bay. I'm just going to go through a couple of pictures of these, and they're not pebbles by any means. Some of the stones we've had here, I've seen took 2 excavators in tandem to carry them and place them. So the scale of a lot of the stonework is really quite impressive. And a lot of it is built into existing ledge or stone outcrops, which really, I think, adds to the beauty of it, incorporating that which is Maine with a little bit of man-crafted work as well. And we
Oh,
are
that's
blessed
right.
also with having a lot of partners who work with us on staff and also as contractors who are really expert stonemasons and do really beautiful work. And some of the stonework is a little more fanciful. I mean, this Easter Ireland inspired head's about 3 feet tall. So some of the work is not just rustic and big boulders and things. Some of it's kind of artistic and interesting, and you never really know what or who you're going to get when you start throwing interesting rocks out as garden art. And interestingly, the son, these are my boys, the one who's closer to us is the one who recently broke his arm climbing on a piece of rock work here at the gardens. But I mean, it's amazing what big rocks, either as a rough form or artistically reimagined, can bring. But also within the gardens, we are really, all the horticulturists are lover of natures. We have more have-a-heart traps and more kind ways to remove any nuisance animals, but most of them we leave in place, you know, as part of the experience. This is a rural setting with a botanical garden that happens to be superimposed on top of it. So again, when you bring in the rocks, you get all sorts of interesting creatures. And back to the other part of Maine, as I'd mentioned before, rocks, water, and kind of summer fun. Summer fun is the gardens, and we'll see those pictures in a minute, but the gardens has worked hard to incorporate both the stone and the water a lot of times together. This is the Lerner Garden of the Five Senses, we'll see later. Which is a lot of, this is our one existing, it was a modified native wet space. It was kind of a shallow vernal pool, which we expanded into a natural pond with, you know, augmented with stones and some bigger features. But a lot of the stonework, I think, is very tastefully done with kind of artisanal pieces like this reflecting pool here, which is much larger than a full-size bathtub, kind of set into some native ledge and some rough cut stone as well. Also, we have at the gardens rotating garden art. Every year we have some different artists who will have basically an outdoor show of their pieces here. And I'll show you some examples of some of the things that we've had just as they sit into the garden spaces. A lot of them have our theme that we feel fit the kind of rough, outdoor, nature-y kind of stuff. It is a lot of it abstract and recycled, but it still ties back to kind of a rough, wild theme. This is a pine cone. And if you've ever flown to Portland Jetport, you may have seen some pieces like this that we have gracing our garden spaces, all made of rebar, and they're much heavier than I would have thought. This elk weighs about 1,000 pounds and can barely be moved by 8 adults, kind of carrying and shimmying it along. We also have, every once in a while, some more, I guess, artistic pieces. They're kinetic pieces of garden art that are steel and reflective. Many of them still exist in our gardens today. But oftentimes it's kind of a bring it in and set it for a year, kind of as a physically moving piece of garden exposition, and it will move to the next show space for those artists. And upcoming, if you haven't seen the work of one Mr. Dambo, who's a Dutch gentleman, we are in phase to be building some large-scale trolls, which are all made out of repurposed and recycled wood from the site where they are built. So basically built out of
Nancy, he's muted.
We are 13 members deep, and here we all are. And I'll go through, not everything, but we are one director who is now stuck with a lot of administrative stuff now that she's in that position, and all the rest of us schlep around outside in various places. So now I'm going to give you, for some reason my screen is frozen. Okay, there we go, we're moving. I'll give you an idea of another day at the office, what we do on a daily basis, and we'll go through a year at CMBG, and then I'll show you some garden spaces as well. So as we are working, you know, effectively 9 to 5 jobs here, we are in the gardens almost all the time. And more than anything, we love to talk to people who have questions, people who love spaces. I don't know, it's amazing how much time we spend just chatting with people about what we're doing, how we've done it, what's this plant, and it really is a lot of fun for us. Here are our choice weapons of mass destruction, the Felco #2 pruners, and some manner of hori-hori. This one I have involved, Alicia, my coworker, has here, is a serrated model. So it actually is great for chopping through roots, functioning as a trowel. It's almost all the tools in one. So we carry these on our hips no matter where we are, basically. And we use them in the beginning of the year to help us spread out mulch. We drop about 1,000 yards of mulch every year, plus or minus, to kind of clean up the garden spaces and make them fresh. So every year we get out the wheelbarrows and we do it one Kubota load at a time. The gardens do not allow any, well, we can't really get any trucks into the space. So you kind of come up to the edge and wheelbarrow it in and you throw it by shovels, one scoop at a time, basically to really take care of the collection. All the horticulturists know their gardens and their spaces, and they really want to take care of their plants. So they don't want to bury anything or give it not enough mulch. We really take the time for kind of a plant by plant or space by space approach. And in the springtime, the weather's not always nice, but early season mulch spreading for the spaces that need it are something that really are imperative to us because we have huge bulb displays every year. We're cycling out of tulips right now because we've gotten some fungal issues in some of our beds. And we really want to make sure that we can get rid of those. They're kind of a tulip specific disease. So we really would love to see these microbes kind of cycle out of our beds. So we're doing more daffodils, alliums, and other bulbs right now. But in a typical year, we do about 50,000 tulips and all sorts of kind of small batches of anywhere from 500 to 5,000, different colors and textures kind of in each space where they're planted. It's really been a lovely display. But as I mentioned recently, we've had issues with tulips, so we've turned to other types of bulbs and other spring annuals, like you see here. And also, we're in the spring when everyone is doing this. This is me. This is where I am. This is my office for almost half the year. As the greenhouse manager and propagator, I am pretty much by myself cranking out about 20 some odd thousand plants every year, from annuals to small woody plants. Each horticulturist gets to pick the design for basically annuals and the perennials to some degree for their garden as they're kind of landscaped, and then they work within that space to specialize it every year to something new and different. But that means everyone has a different ask. So instead of growing 5,000 of this, 5,000 of this, and 5,000 of that, we grow like 26 of 5,000 different things to make every bed a little bit different or interesting or specialized. And that's within each garden. Each bed is different also as well. It's a highly specialized thing. And after all those plants are evacuated from the greenhouse, I get to escape the cover of plastic, and we all sock them all in and water them in well. And then we, as a hort staff, get to manage the spaces, doing some cutbacks, managing the plants as the season comes on. You never know quite what tools you may have in your hand at any given time, but we're always out once things are planted, tending the kind of stalwarts of the garden, the constituent parts that stay are permanent, woody plants and perennials, as well as making sure all the newly planted annuals are watered and really showing off and adding to those more permanent collection displays. So now, for those of us who haven't visited, I'm going to do a quick roll through of the primary or the core named gardens. There are other ones that aren't on this list, but I just want to give you some of the ideas of the ones that have historically been the core of our experience. So here we are in the Giles Perennial and Rhododendron Garden. This is me and my twins. This is the year after I started, when I was a young lad and 20 pounds ago. But it's a lovely garden space. It's about 3 acres. At the end of May, beginning of June, there are over 275 varieties and species planted in groups of from 1 to 7. So it's a big display. It's kind of built into a hillside with a lovely waterfall at the bottom. It was the first garden built at the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens. It is now 15 years old, I think, this year. And all of these terrace beds are built in with a rough New England style kind of stone wall with this New England ledge stone. It's really quite lovely. It's a lovely space to work in. Another of our core gardens is one of the first ones you would have seen if you came into the gardens, the Lerner Garden of the 5 Senses. It's very much a sensory garden. There's a lot of touch, feel, smell, hear, spaces, a lot of interesting stonework to really bring the sense of touch into the space. And also this is continuing the idea of stone and water. I think there's more stonework and water combined in this garden than any other. And it, through its waterway, connects to the one natural or native wet space, which is the Slater Forest Pond which is a very small garden, but it's primarily native plants and is a great place for us to watch the spotted salamanders in the spring. The Beau Sarge Education Center is just a building with, which is a, well, is there another slide of that? Nope. Is a LEED platinum building. It generates more electricity than it uses. It puts electricity back into our grid. It is also a zero water use, I guess at the end of the day, measured facility. So it is, and the landscape around it has no irrigation. It's all perennial and it's almost all native. We've been sneaking some exotic things in there recently, but all plants that do not need to be watered at all. They're all hardy, will come back every year. And it's been a very interesting kind of experiment of what you can do for a garden that does not require any fussing other than maybe some general cleanup. And here's a picture of that building. The building itself is south-facing. Roof is all solar panels, and that helps it generate all the electricity that it helps end up putting back into our grid. The Cleaver Event Lawn used to be a place, it's actually our leach field, but it's a very beautiful green lawn, fancy that, surrounded by perennial beds, and well, perennial, annual, and woody beds. And it used to be a lawn that we had, when we had weddings here up until last year, almost all the weddings would have their event on this space. It's about a half an acre of lawn. It's kind of an oval shape, approachable from 3 sides. Again, surrounded by perennials, annuals, woody things. The Arbor Garden and the Great Lawn are other big grassy space we have, which is again kind of surrounded by managed plantings. And is an arbor, a large arbor underneath it, or at the edge of it rather, that will sit and look out at the whole garden space. But again, a lot of beautiful woodwork and stonework as well. It's also a place where we've seen in previous slides on this lawn, we plop in a lot of our rotating artists' pieces, just so they get really good palette to sit on, so everyone walking by can see that out in the middle of the grass. It does do some damage from the grass, especially in the last few years, but it's really a nice addition to the garden spaces. Our Burpee Kitchen Garden is a kind of a New England-inspired traditional European garden. It kind of is a 4-square design. It is very symmetrical. We're looking at straight in at it from its entrance. It has a 3-foot wall around it. There are 4 kind of L-shaped beds that all face the same orientation. And it is primarily grown with foodstuffs that is harvested for our cafe. And the cafe building is our old visitor center, and we'll get into some of the modifications, but you can see there's a lot of lettuce and kale in here. There's some ornamental things like a millet we sneak in, but we say, hey, it's corn, that counts, right? So we can peripherally get a couple ornamental things in there that really aren't edible crops, but it's just fun for show. And that's our cafe building behind it, and you can see these kind of symmetrical squared beds here. And all those fun lettuces and calendulas and other things down in those plantings in those beds. One of the newer gardens on the main campus is a function of a philanthropic organization in Maine, the Alphon Foundation, which after a huge blowdown after a winter storm that leveled about 3 acres of our spruce buffer space, we built the Alphon Children's Garden, which is a lovely garden where my children have romped around and thankfully not destroyed anything yet. But it is inspired by, again, stones and Maine themes, but primarily by Maine authors. We have references in this garden to Miss Rumphius, Blueberries for Sal, a more recent author who did, I can't remember the name of the author for the Mr. McGee books, which are a rhyming series of books by a Maine author whose name I'm blanking on right this moment. But it is very much a whimsical space with a lot of color to wander through. There are some sandboxes where my children spend most of their lives. And some other spaces work with kids in this space as well. But unfortunately, throughout all these garden spaces, as we're out talking to people, planting things, tending the space, what I've discovered is no matter the further I go in my career here and the longer I'm out, this is all I see. I see the weeds. There could be 10,000 flowers in 1 square foot of all colors and shades and sizes, but all I see are the weeds. And it's a little bit maddening, even if there's just one. This is the interpretation of a lot of horticulturists. Oh, my garden's not perfect, it's not, oh. We're always stressed about how to really primp the space and prep it so it is really pristine for anyone who'd like to come and see it. So we spend a lot of our time cleaning house. And this is in the spring and the fall. We're surrounded by kind of a mixed coniferous deciduous forest. There are more oak leaves than I care to imagine, and that's something we are constantly trying to remove and clean up. But also to mention that we are cleaning, we have a lot of help cleaning our spaces as well. We have, I think in the docket, we have just over 400 volunteers throughout the organization. But within those, there are probably a few dozen horticultural volunteers. And within those, maybe a handful of individuals who spend as much as six hours a week, which is a lot when you're giving your own, free time to help us clean and manage and do everything. I can't begin to think how many hours I spent with some volunteers just doing amazingly tedious, sad bits of weeding or pruning or raking. And it's such a great help, and I'm so grateful for it. Because we wouldn't have the place we have today without this help. So thank you to all of them, wherever you are out there. Fred, I know you're out there too, so thank you. If anyone else wants to drive up and help, you can always volunteer. We have lots of breaks. Again, this cleanup leads to a fall planting, as I mentioned, for our tulip display, which are primarily added in and around our perennials. All the annuals get ripped out after we close, which is the middle of October. The tulips and the daffodils and the muscari and the alliums all go in. And then occasionally we will remulch those spaces. Those plants will have, maybe up to a month or so to root in, and we'll just wait for them until this happens. This is again my beloved red Honda Element, and this is the first snow of last year. Alas, it came much earlier than I thought. But we don't stay, in our offices reading books and eating bonbons all winter. We've set up a winter lights display, which someone mentioned, Gardens Aglow, where the horticulture team goes out and lights up our garden spaces. This is a task given to the horticulture team, not only because we are the people outside, but because we're not going to step on our favorite expensive plants. We will be very careful with these specimens we choose to light. And really, we wouldn't let anyone else in our gardens anyway. If someone wanted to come out from accounting and say, oh, I'd like to wrap your tree with blue lights, it's like, no, you'll probably step on, you might scuff the bark, you might break a branch, let me do it. And it's not that we don't appreciate the help, but we're really so protective of our collection of plants that we wouldn't have it any other way. And we do take it very seriously. This year, I think we have 2 lifts in action also, but we're going to get a 96-foot lift, which is really scary to me. But to wrap some of our specimens, and really our goal in doing so is to present a really lovely experience for people in the off season, which has become a tradition for a lot of families to visit, but really highlight the botanical forms and shapes of a lot of trees. Against the dark sky, who would know what a sugar maple really was? A sugar maple without fall color or being tapped or maybe as a shade tree doesn't mean as much, I guess. And so you think of its kind of skeletal underpinnings and how beautiful it really can be kind of undercover at night at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on December 16th. As we all know, the days get really short. And this also provides, we have a huge local attendance. Just for the state of Maine is our biggest pull into this event. And many people come 2 or 3 times just for something to do on those cold winter days when the nights are much longer than we wish they were. And again, the horticulture staff, once we're all done putting it together, we go out in the parking lots. It's a little bit warmer at the beginning, me on the left versus me on the right with 17 layers, 3 scarves, and my headlamp. We're out directing traffic, and we will do whatever it takes to really keep things going online. And it's a bigger effort than that, but the horticulture team, there is no break for us wicked people, wicked gardeners. We are always out doing something or other. But now to move into kind of the aspirational part, that was some of the nuts and bolts. We'll do a little nuts and bolts now too. But this is going to be commitment to sustainability, how the gardens views aspirationally what we want to be, and specifically what the horticultural team tries to do. So our goal is to be kind of a closed loop system where we really don't bring in anything from outside. We sustain ourselves from what we have on site. This has to do with minimizing consumption of all sorts of things and maximizing utility and production on our footprint of land. Sometimes it involves some local vendors as much as we can, especially I think our garden shop is almost exclusively New England sourced, if not kind of staff produced or made with within driving radius of our place. And we're always wary of our kind of our carbon footprint, how much energy we use. We have a solar field, and we're going to be on one, and we're going to be putting in another one. Water use, especially in recent years, has been a big consideration as it's been hot and dry. And with that, our plant selection. Using plants that need to drink water all day long is really not something that is a sustainable thing. Even if it may be a beautiful garden addition, a lot of our beds have been hot and dry the last few years, and we've really tried hard not to be overtaxing the system we're in by using a lot of water. So with that, growing on site, these are the two greenhouses we have had when I started. They're relatively small. They're about not quite 50 feet long. Only one of them is heated. It's one in the lower right. And that was very much my office. When I moved in, I went to work being an efficiency guru. I pushed all the tables to the side. I built new tables. I built new shelves. I built a new potting bench, really trying to maximize the square footage of the space. And I put everything, this is looking in that from the doors. This is just showing all the tables are always full. There are plants underneath, a mini tables underneath the tables. It's just completely loaded with plants all the time, basically from December until I can get them out, until people can plant them in their garden spaces. In terms of insect invaders, I mean, I am a licensed applicator of all the nasty poison. I've only in just over 5 years, I've only applied any kind of real insecticide once, and that was the plant we brought in and applied it within a week. I'm a strong believer of the softest possible chemical use. I use a lot of natural oils, lavender and neem, citronella and the like, and dish soap, and that takes care of a lot of things in the greenhouse for me. And again, our greenhouses don't run all year, so I can freeze them in the winter, I can cook them in the summer, and for the 3/4 of the year that we use them, I just have to really on top of the plants all the time. And a lot of the invaders we get in the greenhouse are things that we like. So I can actually collect them from the plants where they are nibbling and move them outside into our garden spaces. This is a good example. One monarch that came in or found a way in, she kept laying eggs all over the milkweed I was growing. So once a week, I would pick out handfuls of monarchs and transfer them out into our garden spaces. And again, sustainability, we use this last year about 30,000 pots of different sizes, and I recycle every single one that's not broken. They will be rinsed, and they will be sterilized, and they will be stacked in our bulb crates, and I will save them again for next year. I mean, this is stuff that's generally not easily recycled, especially on a peninsula where we are. Our recycling options are limited. And some of the pots that I still use today, were here when I started. So these kind of single-use 4-inch pots in these crates have seen at least six cycles of use, at least 6 years of use, which I'm very proud of. Also, to push our energy efficiency, if we do have to overwinter any specialty plants that we get from, I don't know, some rare collected location atop of a mountain in northern India, or a gift from a donor and we just have to protect it over the winter, I created this turducken, which is a reference to a Thanksgiving treat, or the chicken inside a duck inside a turkey. I just built this, which this allows me to carry over specialty plants, maybe some communal trays of perennial or woody seedlings that have to sit in their trays for a year or two, and is a highly efficient way for us to schlep a few things through the coldest winter months we have. And as the gardens has been here, this is moving into kind of our aspirations and our growing phase. We found that in the first 10 years, the garden was much more popular than ever imagined. The founders and designers thought 20 to 30,000 people would come, but as of our 10th year, which was 3 years ago now, more than 100,000 people came in the summer to see the garden. So everything was over capacity. This little garden space could see 5,000 people in a day. And it starts to become an issue with kind of traveling on these stone-dusted paths throughout. There'd be bottlenecks, it'd just be hard to get people in and out. We run out of parking. We would run out of bathrooms, and water was an issue with that too. How many flushes can we have in a day for 5,000 people at only 6 toilets? It became a logistical issue. We started falling into the kind of category of large main attraction, I guess, generally. Places like Acadia at El Bean, and locally Pineland Farms, which is a local teaching and production farm. I mean, they get hundreds of thousands or millions of visitors a year. And it was decided that our infrastructure really couldn't carry that many people. So the option was either we privatize the whole thing and say members only, I'm sorry, you can come. If you don't have a card, you can't come in. Or we have to expand a little bit just so the people who are coming can have a parking space. They will have a toilet when they need it. So this new map of the gardens was envisioned. The core gardens we just saw from this garden space right here is this little circled with yellow kind of on the bottom center. And with our added, and that does include the parking within that little yellow blob also. So this expansion was based on a lot of modeling and forecasting, figure out how big and how long the gardens would grow. And this is what we came up with for design to meet our parking and infrastructure needs, to meet what we think would be, or thought would be, the maximum number of people that would ever come to Maine in the summer, you know, for the foreseeable future. And this would be the single last expansion of the garden spaces. And other than the initial construction, this is only the second real growth phase of the space, after we realized how popular it had become and was well beyond anyone's imagination. So this is an overview of the gardens as of, I think, 3 years ago, as that construction was being implemented. The yellow blob is the original core gardens. This reddish blob was the parking for it. And you can see there's a big building here. There's some parking lots. It is more than doubled, I guess, the cleared space. And a lot of that has been for infrastructure that's kind of less than beautiful, like in a lot of, I guess, considerations. Parking and bathrooms. Visitor Center has a lot of bathrooms. Parking is up over here. And you see those two right there in those two colors. Yellow is kind of garden experience and red is parking. And when was it? It'll be 4 years ago this winter, we started this process. And just one day we were kind of, we knew it was coming, but then big equipment started rolling in. And in no time at all, this is what was, I guess, had been sheep farm up until the beginning of the 20th century, had been allowed to regrow. So it is filled with stone walls. It is definitely a space that had been farmed within the last 100 years and had been open. It was a sad day for Hort to have it be cleared because we had a lot of trails that went through the space, and we were really proud of being, you know, kind of tied into the wild spaces around us. But really came at the price, again, do we tell people, to turn people away? That really wasn't the impetus of the gardens. It was a people's garden. It was made for people in Maine or New England to come and see. So you didn't have to drive to New York or Montreal, something that's closer to home. And it really wanted to be accessible to people to come whenever they wanted without having to show their card. Yes, I'm a, you know, card carrying member. So Visitor Center was one of those things to allow the experience of primarily bathrooms and our gift shop. Our gift shop got overrun all the time with just people, and just it was a glorified closet, I think. And there's a bigger space now, and they're about almost 10 times the bathroom space capacity we had previously in our new Visitor Center, which is a lovely building. Here's an aerial shot of it. It's two big wings with an atrium that you kind of walk through in the middle. So on the near side is a garden shop and some offices, and the far end by the parking in the distance is administrative offices. It's a lovely building that's not as energy efficient as our previous buildings that we talked about, being LEED certified, platinum, net zero, blah, blah, blah. But it was really thoughtfully considered and involved planting. There was so much planting around this new space. It was unbelievable. Thoughtful watering with kind of below subsurface irrigation was laid out just so watering above with hoses wouldn't spend staff time or wouldn't waste water. So we could turn on irrigation as we need it. But the parking lots have been very important to us here. And that's a little why Boston and Northern New England coming together. But for 750 spaces, the Hort team assembled the spring after the construction started. You can see within 4 months of the clear, and not all mud because we know mud season's a real thing. We were out with our Kubotas and our tools planting. We've planted an uncountable amount of full-size trees. These are 8 to 10 foot white pines and balsams. We grew a lot of our own as well, but planting the buffers of the space that we cleared, planting within the parking lots. The idea is that the parking lot will eventually look like it did before, returning all the native plants basically to those spaces, just in a slightly different arrangement with a little strip of asphalt in the middle. The idea was that it would be almost the trees would come together over the top of these narrow parking ribs and almost shade all the asphalt. And that was the idea of this parking, again, not to create a hot blacktop jungle, but a little bit of thoughtful parking within a almost reforested space. So to give you an idea of what we've done so far, hundreds of deciduous trees. I checked the numbers recently, it's actually close to 1,500 conifers of any from a 1 gallon to a 10-foot size, many thousand, 6,400 native shrubs, almost 10,000 perennials. Most of those, again, are native. Suspect those plants, almost 100% of our plants put back in here are native to New England, and better than, I think it's something like 88% are native to Maine and are native to the site where we're putting them. Like the balsam firs and the hay-scented ferns and the durvilla and all the plants that were there are put back. Not the same plants, but are replanting the same things. And as much as we can, we've grown them on site with almost 3/4 grown by me, which has been a lot of little plants. And we're not done yet. So here's a winter view of this parking lot. And again, the aspirations and efficiency. This is a porous paving experiment. You see the two different types of asphalt. The more coarse looking stuff is actually, water goes through it. It's graded so the water will go to the edges of the lot and go through the pavement. It's about, I think it's 9 or 10 feet of kind of lasagna layers of gravel and filtration underneath that before the water goes out and is filtered in a big cistern and then is put out from there. We test, you can see the differences in the pavement here. Water goes right through it. This is avoid puddling and avoid runoff, and it's treated all on site, and we have it tested. I don't know if it's still every week, but for all the petrocarbons and gasoline related stuff that comes out of cars, to make sure that we're catching all of that. And it's almost like a giant Zamboni vacuum machine that goes back and forth through that coarse stuff and sucks out all the dirt and the junk, so it can water can still percolate through and be filtered. This is a view looking up at 5 terraced layers of parking, each one about 8 or 9 feet above the one in the distance. And the idea is almost have these narrow planting beds. Here's looking at one, which is almost at a 45-degree angle also, to kind of screen in the lot above it. So that if you looked up at the parking lot, you wouldn't see any other cars. You just see kind of terrace forest up above you. So eventually these will be a completely maintenance-free space, we hope, full of native plants that are adapted to be in this kind of Maine environment. We've even planted our hell strips, you'll see here, with a lot of our native or pseudo-native pollinator plants. The echinacea is a bit of a reach for New England, but native grasses and native plants for butterfly larvae to nibble on. Plants that we know that will not die in these spaces, and they like hot and dry and will support native wildlife. And thinking of supporting wildlife as our visitors and ourselves, I guess, non-native wildlife, we try to produce a lot of food here on site, again, with aspirations of being sustainable. Here's a kitchen garden stuffed full of things. This is one year where we were really strict about how we grew almost everything that you can eat, with the exception I see a few cannas hiding in there. But there are 7 or 8 kinds of basil, they're leafy greens, they're tomatoes, all sorts of stuff. And primarily we tend to avoid things like corn or some things that may ask raccoons or squirrels to destroy it for us, not only for the sake of the display, but the sake of using it for our kitchen garden. So a lot of solanaceous crops, tomatoes and peppers and things. But this kitchen garden uses a lot of fun ornamental things, like this is, I think this is cherry tomato, the variety is B black or B as in bumblebee blue. A lot of it's ornamental. But this last year, along one of our greenhouses, we created about 1,000 square foot, well, maybe it's about 1,500 square feet of garden space with traditional foodstuffs. We've been cranking out squash and cucumbers and tomatoes like mad, again, to support the food needs here on site. We grow a lot of fun stuff, and we have a lot of fun with it sometimes. Sometimes when you have bring your kids to work day, they think harvesting vegetables is really funnier than you do. But really the idea is to, again, be self-sufficient and not have to pay someone else and bring in trucks that are spitting out exhaust, between here and there, even though there are a lot of lovely small farms in Maine to support. We also grow some oddball crops. These are pawpaws, which is Asimina triloba is a botanical name for this plant. It's a really cool, it's the biggest native native North American fruit with tropical ancestors. They produce these huge fleshy banana-like kind of custardy fleshed fruits that can be up to 6 inches long. affectionately known as the Appalachian banana. They make beautiful cream pies. This was my experimenting at home with what can I do with these things. So this is a pawpaw meringue cream pie. Think of also specialty crops. We do a lot of interesting native fruit production. This is elderberry, and I've collected this. And as I grew up in a kind of a rural setting, you know, with the county fair, it really production and then storage of a lot of food crops is part of my upbringing. So I crank out a lot of the jams and jellies initially for the cafe space. And since we've expanded that, they're doing more of their own, but I do a lot of playing around with the recipes and things just for fun. But thinking of production on the garden side, there is more plans within our expansion. We have some greenhouses I'd mentioned that were on site, but as we've built the gardens bigger, there has been a lot more garden space. I mean, we've more than tripled the amount of beds we have to plant with that visitor center and the parking lots and all that new stuff. And we didn't have the greenhouse space to grow it. So basically we rented greenhouses from Unity College on a site that was about an hour and a half away, but was the most economical and willing to work with us. And we grew plants there over, you know, thousands of square feet of bench space. You can see us cranking out. These are perennials, gallon-sized perennials for the parking lots, actually, that we couldn't grow on site just so we didn't have greenhouse space. And we grew there for a few years until we realized, you know, this isn't really sustainable either. You know, having 3 26-foot U-Hauls we would rent and drive back and forth, an hour and a half each way, bringing in our annuals, our parking lot stuff, and we just unloaded these huge pads of plants that, I mean, is what we're using for our gardens. But it didn't seem to make sense not only to pay the Hort staff to be truckers for a week when we should be in our gardens, or at least on campus. And also just the carbon of it just burning up with these giant trucks going back and forth really didn't make a lot of sense. So after a couple of years, I've figured out a financial model that said, look, if we build a couple big greenhouses, like this one was brand new this spring, we built it over the winter. It's a 96-foot long, beautiful, beautiful house. Like building this will pay for itself, or relative to growing things off-site. I mean, this house costs the same as a year and a half of the cost of growing things somewhere else. So it was immediately basically erected the same year. Like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Ooh, let's do that. And plus we have control over the greenhouse too. Every time I wanted to see how are my coleus growing, I'd have to drive an hour and a half north just to see it and then drive an hour and a half back. And it really didn't make a lot of sense. So again, sustainable. We worked with our own vendors and kind of family partners as spouses and family members, worked at other organizations. And I got another 26-foot U-Haul for a couple of days, and I went around and collected pallets. And that's how I outfitted this new greenhouse. Cinder blocks and pallets, the old school traditional way of kind of building greenhouse benches. And all those cinder blocks actually we had on site also because we've been using them to bolster all of our big burlapped trees to help them stay upright before we planted them. So after we planted everything, I just stole all the cinder blocks and went out with my truck and got some pallets, and for the cost of just driving around for 2 days, built all the greenhouse tables I needed for this 96-foot house, which incidentally is very well heated, has great air circulation, and is a wonderful, wonderful brand new greenhouse. It's the first time I've worked in a brand new house before that I got to help build, and it's really nice. I also made my own bench again. I made that one I showed you before, but using all these recycled scraps and bits and pieces and pallets, I made a kind of 4-person potting bench. It has 2 faces and 2 people per side. It's kind of stuck in the middle of that house. So this is my new office for now. It creates about 26,000 plants a year. We kind of grow perennials and cold season things first, and then those go outside into, where are they? Cold frames. And then the second crop is, the bulk of our summer planting, which is almost all annual plants, which I save as soon as it's cold, warm enough to put the perennials outside in cold frames, which we again built with recycled pallets. You see the nails in those lovely boards over there I pounded out. And more of those cinder blocks. I kind of built myself a cold frame, which is also about 80 feet long and about, how big is that? 16 feet wide. And covered that with some leftover plastic from the greenhouse and moved all the perennials and the pansies and things out, and then moved the annuals in. But this still isn't quite enough. We still don't have enough room to grow all that we need. So the future idea is to make a physically permanent kind of gutter connected greenhouse. The hard plastic walled, growing on a radiant slab greenhouse, this big Dutch style you see, have a few hoop houses and then have a horticultural head house. By that time, I will probably have transitioned out of working in the rhododendron garden, and I will be teaching the boring classes that everyone has to suffer through, but also doing the research and development. Again, plant breeding is something I love to do. Creating new flowers, or just the ideas of how to mix the colors of plant A and plant B and create some new combination of traits. It's just really wonderful idea, I think, and it's a lot of fun, just kind of the thought process behind it. Oh, what can I make? If I mix my paints, what can I create? So I'll be probably more, as time goes on in the greenhouse, working on breeding new plants that are suited for Maine and New England gardens in kind of the northern latitude here in North America. And these are epimediums right here, and got the tweezers out. So there are a lot of plants we'd like to work with. Some of them are native plants. Violets are one group, Amsonias are another. But there are a lot of other things that, are garden meat and potatoes, the peonies, the hostas, the daylilies, where I started my love of plant breeding. And those will be things that we work on as time goes on. I've started some here. Right now, I have some plants in the garden that I actually created. This is an orange double daylily that I named for my twins, the Unexpected Extra, which got named for the fact that I wasn't trying to breed a daylily with extra petals, but I got them anyway. And then I got little James over here on the right. We didn't really expect that there was another one in there either, but at that first ultrasound, there was a second little fish. So that's what we got, Unexpected Extra. And this is one of our woodland trails that leads off into, our trails are, I walk on them other than whenever I can, and avoid the main pathways, because I love the feel of kind of the northern, almost boreal forest, the mixed hardwood conifers and all the moss and all the kind of little spruce patches. It's a lovely place to walk through if you have some quiet time when you're here and downtime out of the primary garden spaces. But where we're going from here, we're hopefully going to continue down the path here in Maine and at the gardens with a more sustainable, more environmentally thoughtful experience, which we're working for every day. And not just the Hort staff, the whole team here at the gardens is on board for that. And we're really happy to share what we get to create with that mindset with everyone who can have the time to come. And with that, thank you very much. That ran a little longer than I thought, so we're awake. He's done. Wake up. But I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. And if Nancy wants to unmute everybody, and I don't know how we're going to call them out, but I'm happy to go through the slides and look at anything that you'd like or talk about anything you've got time for.
Okay,
thank you very much.
We're getting some thank yous over here, and thank you so much. That was awesome. And the whole thing is we were able to record this as well. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good, good. And now others can unmute themselves, and as we have questions, let me, I think what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to give me back the screen.
Okay, you are screen sharing. I need to.
Let me see.
Screen share, I'll do that. Stop, oops, stop share.
Stop share.
There we go.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Whoops. All right, now I've got to stop share. All right.
There we are.
We have everybody back?
Yep,
Do we have any questions?
I do.
Okay, Jean Mullen, go ahead.
Hi, I really enjoyed your presentation. I have a huge granite outcropping that goes between my yard in the back and my neighbor's yard. They have the sun, so it's very lovely. I have a very shaded rock outcropping with different trees. What can you suggest to put in the little gullies? There's moss growing on its own, but what shade plants would you recommend for that kind of a...
My screen is further. Sure, I apologize. I just got a warning. My internet is a little bit unstable for whatever reason, but plants for dry ledge. In New England, this bedrock is all too close to the surface almost at all times. I'm sure anyone who's tried to go digging somewhere finds a rock. But dry shade is a really tough space to work in. And it depends on I would first investigate your ledge and look and see what kind of crevices or cracks you might be able to work into, just to think of where you can hide some soil or some kind of medium for growing or for roots to stabilize in.
It does have a lot of crevices in it, but I just didn't know what to put in it that would be, you know, efficient, other than the moss that's growing there naturally, you know?
Right. It is a very difficult spot.
Okay.
One thing to consider before we even consider what plants to go in there, if you want to some extra stones or maybe some kind of terracing to help hold some soil back against it. I don't know if that'll fit your aesthetic, but if you almost kind of made like a line of stone or of something, even a downed tree and just backfilled it, that might be a way to get some soil or something in there so roots can get some purchase and you can actually grow within it. Bald rock is very difficult, and in combination with either sun or shade is hard. A lot of native plants come to mind. Aronia is one of small woody plant. Is it choke? I confuse the two for the common name. Aronia melanocarpa is the botanical name, and I don't remember if it's choke cherry or choke berry. Excuse me. I know one of them is like a Linicera, and one of them I just don't remember the common name for it. But there are a number of dwarf varieties. Landscape low mound or landscape hedge. They're two dwarf varieties developed at the University of Connecticut. They tolerate, and they were selected from plants growing basically on a bald top of a mountain in cracks. They produce edible fruit for wildlife. They have lovely fall color. That's one thing you can do as a kind of a starter plant. You might try some bearberry Arctostaphylos. Get another native plant. It's in the blueberry-ish family. You could try some blueberries in there, or some heathers and heaths might work. Again, just that they may require a little water from time to time. I don't know how you'd like to manage the space, but those are some things I would start with if you're within the cracks and whatnot.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Okay, Heather.
I'm wondering, do you and your staff have any problems with the brown tail moth affecting, having allergies or that sort of thing up in your area?
Yes. When I first moved to Maine, I had never heard of the brown tail moth, which is a cousin to our better known tent caterpillars, the gypsy moth. And when I moved to Brunswick, that's where the kind of the epicenter was, kind of north of Portland. And I can't tell you how many times they're just covered with itchy nastiness. They feed on a lot of things, a lot of rose family plants and oaks. They love red oak, which is one of the major kind of drought tolerant northern deciduous trees that we have here in New England. So they like to defoliate those. Yes, we have had issues with here at the gardens. In the last few years, this exotic pest had been moving north because it's been so hot. They are from kind of northern and central Europe, kind of a misty coastal kind of space. So coastal New England kind of fits that as being mild summer, mild winter, I guess, as a function of being close to the ocean. But as it's been hotter and hotter, even since I've been in Maine, they've kind of progressing northward. So now cities that are north of the Boothbay Peninsula, like Rockland and Camden, are getting hit pretty hard as these little creatures are finding better habitat, more suitable further north where it's cooler. We did have some issues in the gardens 2 years ago on some weeping cherries, which got some brown tail issues, and of course some canopy oaks. I still got some brown, and the little caterpillars have hairs that cause a little itchy rash, and the hairs can remain kind of hot or live in the leaf litter for a couple of years at least. So I mean, I got some this year, just kind of cleaning up some edges of our rhododendron garden, which is a canopy primarily of oak, which they like to feed on. And previous generations had shed and left a lot of itchy little treats for me to find. So, I mean, we have had some issues, but I mean, we sprayed our weeping cherries, which are on the edges of, primary walkways, with neem oil, kind of after a close one day. And it's a non-toxic way just to kind of smother kill any of the caterpillars. And then actually we put underneath the tree, we put a bunch of big drop painting cloths so we could collect all the caterpillars and just take them out. so we wouldn't have their itchy little residual bits there for guests or kids or anyone else to find when they were cleaning or working in that space. So yes, they have been an issue, but thankfully it looks like they're moving into cooler pastures up the coast and some degree interior, but mostly a coastal issue.
Okay, any other questions? Susan?
Nancy, I have one more if I may.
Go ahead, Jean.
I was just wondering what he recommends for mulch for shade gardens. Usually I shred my leaves and you put that on it. But I was, rather than bark mulch, I was just wondering what he thought of that.
Okay, that's a really good question, and really it shows some thoughtfulness of your garden materials. A lot of people shred their leaves or kind of cut back material in the fall, and that works great. I mean, it's good for a lot of native creatures that kind of like to hide under leaves or kind of stuffy stuff versus bark mulch. Like some kinds of butterflies and like all sorts of amphibians hide under leaves and such in the winter that can't easily hide under mulch. So those are really good options for wildlife. We use bark mulch here almost everywhere. I have been pushing though in the rhododendron garden here just because it's so big. It's almost 3 acres and it's oak canopy to have a little kind of push behind chipper just to grind the leaves and blow them back out to the beds. And that produces a fine mulch. And again, it's good for wildlife. And I'd recommend that if you can do it. You could also just rake them into a pile and mow over them a bunch of times. And you can either bag it or blow it into the bed kind of in the fall.
I just
That
bought
works
a
too.
small shredder again. I had one and then when I moved, I got rid of it, but I just bought one. So that's going to be my fall project.
I think it's a great idea for anyone who can, again, you save some money. I mean, it takes a little bit more time, but that is almost always the trade-off. If you're not going to spend the money, then you've got to have the time, I guess, to do it. And I think that's a great thing to do. I mean, the leaves are free and you basically leave them in place. You kind of shred them and set them over to the side a little bit. And all those butterflies and amphibious creatures that have adapted to live in that stuff through the winter can still hunker down in those spaces and you get a nice mulch out of it too.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? I'm looking around here. See if all righty. I don't know if I have any more questions. Let's see. Anybody raise a hand? Okay, well, it looks like you've answered all of their questions. Dan?
Well, good. Again, I'm sorry that ran a little longer than I thought. I hope everyone's still awake. You can always, refill. But the presentation, as Nancy said, will be online, so anyone who wants to revisit it later. Also, feel free to go to the Gardens website. If you go to the staff directory, you can find my email there or my office number. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always happy to respond.
I do have one question. How much longer are you going to be open, or are you open all the time?
Well, this year we're closing, I think, the weekend of Indigenous Peoples Day. Is our last weekend or the weekend before. I'm not sure if we're open I think we're closed on that Monday, formerly Columbus Day. So
Okay.
the second week of October will be our last week open. We've had some nights in the 40s. I'm sure
Okay, your network went unstable.
you have too.
Okay,
It's
you
really lovely
you-
right now. Or some things are bloomed out or shifted, but
Okay, very
yes,
And I have-
October 14, 15.
Sorry, I have another question.
Okay, Heather.
Is
Go
there
ahead, Heather.
Sure.
Gardens Aglow this winter in December?
Gardens Aglow there's been a lot of thought into how to do it. And I mean, on our busiest nights last year, almost 7,000 people came. And it was, if you've come before, and especially in the last 2 years, it's been really busy and really, really tight. We are working on Gardens Aglow this year. It's going to be a different kind of experience where people do not physically get out of their cars. It's going to be a driven through event, which it'll be shorter. And I'm not sure, we're still working on how to charge and how to work the logistics of it out, but just to keep all the visitors safe who've kind of made a tradition of it, and also give the local businesses a reason to stay open, when they would actually close when all tourist folks go home, that we're trying to keep it open in the safest way possible for the people on the peninsula and also for the guests who'd like to come and see it. we're still working out exactly how it's going to be rolled out, but the answer is yes, it will be this year in kind of a new format. So you have to bring your own kettle corn in the car for those of you who come before.
Okay, that's great. Any other questions, folks? No? Well, then if we don't have any other questions, then we're going to let you off the hook, Dan.
Okay, well, thank
Oh,
you
you're
very much for your
welcome to
time.
stay along if you want to listen to the rest of our meeting. That's fine. Okay, everybody unmute. We can applaud this gentleman.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you very much for having me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.
We all appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Take
Oh.
care, everyone. And again, any questions, you can find my info on the website, or I think I don't know if I put my email in this presentation or not. I probably should have if I didn't, but on the Gardens website, you can find me if you need to.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Take care, everyone.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care.
Thank you.
All righty. Ladies, I'm going to stop the recording. Okay.